Well, half of Australia is in lockdown, including all of Victoria, which only just exited lockdown number 5. For Victoria, it's the 6th shutdown. So is this sort of short, sharp lockdown approach sustainable? Joining me now live is Small Business Australia Executive Director Bill Lang. Bill, thank you for joining me. Victoria only just began to enjoy freedoms once again, and it's almost like deja vu.
Yeah, well, very much Groundhog Day, Danica, but it's the worst type of Groundhog Day for small business families in Victoria. And, you mentioned the number 6, the 6th lockdown. And yes, there were 6 new positive cases out of 6 million people. And we're all locked down again. Our businesses are closed. A number of businesses have already been lost. There's been more than 186 days of lockdown in the state of Victoria since the pandemic started. So you can think about the cumulative effect, particularly when these small business families have not been adequately financially supported, and therefore that has been their own money. They've either been borrowing more money, selling assets, dipping into superannuation, doing everything they can to be able to continue to employ people, meet their obligations, feed their families. But now 186 days of lockdown later, 6 positive cases from yesterday out of 6 million people. We've got tens of thousands of them that are on the verge of giving up for good.
How much is National Cabinet to blame for this? They've endorsed these short and sharp lockdowns. Is this now setting a precedent until we're able to get the vaccine rates higher?
Well, it's a really interesting question, and without being privy to the conversations that go on there, and I think wouldn't every Australian like to see those meetings broadcast live? In fact, here in Victoria, what we'd also like to see, although the government has blocked it, is actually making available the public health advice, as opposed to what appears to many people to be political decision-making that's taking place. But National Cabinet, it's very interesting, appears to be led by the Premier of Australia, Daniel Andrews, and that the Prime Minister of New South Wales has now fallen into line. And I see the Premier of Australia was thanking him with respect to his advice on going hard and going early. And I just heard the commander, you had a bit on the show there, the commander of the COVID testing down here, talking about acceleration and primary close contacts. But I think the number was almost 30,000 Victorians were tested yesterday for COVID-19. And 29,994 were negative. So we have this epidemic of fear that we've been put into now for more than 18 months. No one can put their hand on their heart there at the National Cabinet, the coagulation of COAG, the rebadging of COAG. And no one can put their hand on the heart and say, well, look, even if we get to 80 or 90%, we still won't have lockdowns. Yeah. Everywhere else in the world, the decision's been made. We have to learn how to live with this virus and let adults get on with their lives.
In the last hour or so, support has been announced for Victorian small businesses. They'll be eligible for payments of up to $8,000. Does that go far enough?
Well, let's have a talk about that, because this is a bit like, the Romans used to sort of, have bread and circuses to distract the citizens. And of course, we always hear about it's a $400 million package here in Victoria, or there's been $55 billion. And the citizens that aren't involved in small business goes, well, that's a big number. That's good. That's good. That should be enough. And even you guys just had up to $8,000 for small businesses. In fact, there's only about 90,000 of the 500,000 small businesses in Victoria that are going to receive something. In many cases, they might receive a couple of $1,000s. The 8,000 you had on your screen is for sort of extreme hardship. But in many cases, it's nowhere near enough, particularly when you're dealing with day number 187 of lockdowns you've experienced as a small business family in Victoria.
I want to ask you about this decision by SPC, the major company first company in Australia to mandate vaccines for its employees. Do you expect other businesses to follow? Was this the right decision?
Well, look, we have a whole bunch of, complex laws and legislation in place prior to COVID, in the pre-COVID world. Fair Work Australia is a great example of it. The privacy legislation's another great example of it. But we've got people running businesses and they've got responsibilities for occupational health and safety. And if they don't have a way of actually knowing whether someone is healthy when they're coming to work, they run the risk of those other people that they're having an unsafe workplace. Not to mention the impact that if you get named to be an exposure site, that, you've been all of a sudden the atom bomb of poison's been dropped on you and you could lose a whole bunch of your customers. So it's great leadership, we believe, from SPC to say, well, look, we're going to require our employees to do it. And the unions are kicking and screaming and carrying on. But hang on a minute. There's 14 million Australians today locked down. A whole bunch of rights and freedom have gone. It's time to adjust things like privacy. It's time to adjust things like if in fact we're not going to be able to get our lives back unless there's this level of vaccination taking place. And what's an employer to do in terms of trying to keep their business going?
Will be interesting to see if other companies do certainly follow suit. Bill Lang, thank you for joining me.
Thanks, Danica.